Good evening, everyone. Welcome to one of Get's weekly webinars. This week, we're going to be talking about how mobility operators, so the operators of the industry, are meeting the challenges of, the global COVID-19 pandemic that's obviously affected the whole world. Ground transport is a big part of that. You've got myself. I'm the head of enterprise in Get UK. So that's actually not my name. I've got a T on the end, but I could be Grand today if you want me to be. I'm Paul Grant. I head up enterprise at Get in the UK. So that's kind of the larger clients that we tend to work with and on board to use our platform, typically in the UK, but also on a global basis. We've got Dr. Michael Galvin, who I've known for many years and I had the pleasure of working with as well at some firms, a specialist in the mobility and sector, and very much part of the regulatory policy space, both in the UK and globally. And then Greg Mendoza, who is a regional vice president at Carey Global. So you have a couple of very experienced industry guys, along with me, to talk about this space. So just a small bit about Get. This is not in any way a sales pitch or anything like that. It's not about that. It really is to try and help, either customers, existing customers, soon to be customers, or, forthcoming customers, and anyone within the industry to kind of understand what COVID has done to the industry immediately, where it now sits kind of 3 months later, and what the future looks like. So it's not all bad. There's been some obviously difficult moments for people, but there are some signs that things are changing. Get, if people don't know, anyone on this call, started back in 2010, so it's now 10 years old. We service over 17,000 kind of corporations of different sizes around the world. We are based, our HQ is in Israel. That's where the company was founded. We're in the UK, Israel, and Russia as native fleets. So we have our own taxi fleets in those locations, but we also have and are growing a global network of affiliates around the world so that anyone can use us. A third of the Fortune 500, for example, use our product, which is an app and web-based technology system. So I've done the welcome, sort of introduced who's who. We're going to talk about how mobility has been affected, what are the trends, facts, sort of some numbers by Dr. Galvin. We're then going to have a bit of a panel discussion between the three of us. There's been quite a few questions that have been posted already by people before the webinar, but you are welcome. Anyone is welcome. We really welcome it, actually, to post in the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen any questions at all relating to this topic, happily answered by anyone. Like I say, the three of us have been around this industry for a long time. That's why I've got a lot of grey hair, and that's why those two guys have not got much hair, because it's quite a stressful industry to be in. So we're happy to answer anything that comes up, any questions you might want to talk about. A little bit kind of about how things are at the moment. I mean, consumer habits and expectations, I think, certainly have been changing over time. It's not just a corona thing. The expectations have been, risen year after year. I would say, really since a lot of it, since the days of Addison Lee coming into the market and kind of disrupting, I would say. I would mark them as the original disruptor. I was fortunate enough to work there for a long time. They were the original disruptor in the market. And then obviously globally, you've had, I can't say their name, but they're called Uber. They've risen the bar in many ways for consumer and corporate kind of expectation of how you book, use, consume ground transport products. We see ourselves as very much in that sector. We are a technology company as Get, first and foremost. We don't actually own any vehicles. We do run some taxi services, but we don't own any. We really are that kind of forefront of the technology part to put in people's hands. So COVID obviously has dramatically impacted how corporations, so business users, are consuming the service immediately when kind of the UK and most of the world went into lockdown. Most corporates put some kind of travel, policy in place. Almost all of them did. Overnight, most international travel certainly kind of stopped. Almost all domestic travel stopped in any form. Pretty much, train, bus, whatever. Very small amount of ground transport, private ground transport that we all run and work in, did carry on, but it wasn't much at the time. I think everyone in the world was kind of seeing what was going to happen. What we've seen and the kind of evidence that's coming out from various different resources, this one is taken from the GBTA, who are probably the world's largest kind of corporate travel group, industry trade group, is that actually lots of companies, so about 60% of companies at the moment, are planning to resume at least domestic travel within the next few months. This was a couple of months ago, so actually it says within 3 months. So this was done a month ago, sorry. Within the next few months, domestic travel at least is going to be starting up again for corporations. And actually 1 in 5 are saying that in the same period, they're looking to try to get people to travel internationally. But, and this is the big but, over 90% of them see that sort of guidelines and standards are going to be key to really a duty of care piece from a corporate buyer of the service. How can they allow their employees to travel safely to any location, knowing that, as an employer, you do have a duty of care to your employees. So kind of, we as an industry, I think, play a very big part in the success of this and how this can work going forward. So it's going to be interesting to speak to Mike and Greg as to their thoughts on how this can work. Just an example, London as an example, a very busy, bustling, cosmopolitan city, like many others in the world, but London is an example. With the social distancing measures, you've already gone from 100% service at the moment with 2 meter social distancing. You can only permit 50,000 travelers could board the tube network every 15 minutes. That compares to 325,000 in that normal period. So, even if you're reducing the social distancing to 1 meter, still at maximum, it's going to be able to handle a quarter of the pre-lockdown capacity. Now that's significant. The London transport network, and especially for businesses, is incredibly relies on the tube and bus network to get people into work. Obviously, less people will be traveling, but how are these people going to get in? Yes, there might be some bikes that I think corporations are thinking differently about how their staff are going to get in and out. There will be less staff obviously traveling with people working from home and things, but people will still need to travel safely and feel okay with it. And that's where I think this industry, the industry we work in, could actually be in a very good position to kind of help really the corporations get staff traveling and feeling safe about traveling back and forth to the office. I won't really go into this, but in detail, because I think it's good for us to all have a chat really, but a very major global TMC said that sort of 95% of its clients are going to be restarting business travel, basically, kind of in the near future. So it is coming back. To what levels, I think nobody knows, but it is coming back. How can this industry, the mobility sector, work with that and actually thrive? Is there a possibility that we can go from the sort of the decrease that we've all seen to a significant increase? I mean, we're certainly seeing it already as the uptake, but it will be interesting to know from some of the experts how they see that going forwards. Safety checklist. Most operators around the world have now put something in place. Some of it is a legality of their licensing regulation in whichever city or jurisdiction they're in. Some of it is their own personal choice of what they want to do. So things like hand sanitizers, things like drivers wearing masks, passengers wearing masks. Some companies, and it's quite a hot topic of debate at the moment, Obviously, fortunately, particularly for London, the London Black Taxi has forever had the division, the screen in place that, you know, naturally builds an instant barrier between driver and passenger. Private hire vehicles haven't had that. So some companies are exploring and installing some to see how that goes, but that is quite a debate because they're typically not being sort of permitted by their licensing authority. So there's a whole topic around that, and I think that becomes kind of a social factor in there as well. What do the travellers feel safe with versus regulation versus it's a quite a minefield actually. So I think enough from me. I will hand over to Mike Galvin now, who is going to talk about some trends, facts, and numbers on a global level.
Hello, good evening. For anybody who doesn't know me, in a nutshell, I've been involved in the taxi and private hire industry in London, nationally and internationally for the last 4 decades. I've worked for most of the biggest well, not Uber, but most of the biggest organisations in the industry during that period. Comcab, Addison Lee, Comfort Delgro, Transport for London, and so on. So to move on and really talk about what we're seeing at the moment, I was really pleased to see Paul's presentation because the facts and figures that I've identified are pretty similar, which is refreshing. I've been talking to operators in London, the UK, Europe, and the US, and pretty much, I mean, there's the odd exception, but pretty much most people have seen something like a 90% reduction in their level of business. And that 90% reduction, pretty much the first 6 or so weeks of the various lockdowns that have taken place across the world, that's where they were. They saw no increase and no change. Happily, over the last 6 weeks or so, people have started to see variously, 1%, 2%, 3% kind of week on week increase against that very low base. And there's distinct trends coming out that the pace is quickening slightly. Now, that could be, particularly in the UK at the moment, that the weather's changed, and we know the weather has a big impact on what goes on in our industry. But hopefully it's not. Hopefully it's the reduction in the rules concerning lockdown. People are able to get out, travel a bit more, do a few more things, and hopefully as well from July the 4th, we'll start to see that recovery pick up. But I think when you talk to operators in detail about this, there's a number of concerns about resumption of operations. Everybody would like to go from where they are today to back to what used to be called normal. And I think most of us can agree that that's not going to happen, or it's very unlikely to happen anyway. I'd love to be proved wrong on that one. But I think, the general kind of view amongst operators, certainly politicians, various observers, is that the recovery and the resumption of operations and so on is going to be somewhat stuttering, and it's going to take, airlines and people are talking about anywhere between 18 months and 3 years to get back to the kind of figures we had before. And I think there's a general concern amongst operators, and I think this is echoed with people like restaurants, theatres and others, that they could resume operations, pick up all or most of the costs that they had before, but not be seeing anything like the volumes they had before, and therefore finding themselves in real difficulties as far as cost versus income, the cash flow issues. I mean, lots of companies have survived the last 12 or 13 weeks because they've been able to really cut costs, and they've still got customers paying for journeys maybe that took place, a month or two before the lockdown. So that's kind of carried them through. when they start to resume operations, and suddenly they've got to pick up the cost of their staff and other costs, and start paying drivers in advance of receiving the money from customers, then it's going to get pretty difficult. I've also had operators share concerns about the idea of, the second spike that's been spoken about all the way through. We get everybody back, we start to try and get the business back into growth, and suddenly we're back where we started, everything's in lockdown, and we've got more problems. And I think the events of the last few days, where Leicester has been pinpointed as somewhere that's going to have, a resumption of some of the lockdown rules, has worried people, because if it can happen in Leicester, it can happen in lots of other places. So I think, although there's been an awful lot of pain that people have gone through over the last 12 or 13 weeks, what I'm getting from operators is that there's likely to be a lot more pain trying to resume operations in some kind of cost-efficient, income-efficient way, and that's a serious concern. What we are seeing, I think, is that most operators have been fairly innovative. They've, as Paul said, they've brought in a number of safeguarding measures, sanitizers, and so on. And that is obviously starting to help people who, considering traveling. They've now got the choice of public transport, which most people have been told not to use, and perhaps pressing up against other people and so on. And a single vehicle, often with a partition, certainly sanitized and clean, and traveling with one other person, with the windows open, that kind of thing. There's a, there's a safer option. And I totally agree with Paul that I think there could be a bit of a renaissance here for the private hire and taxi industry across the territories that I've looked at, where people choose to travel alone rather than revert to public transport. We're probably at a bit of a disadvantage for the next couple of months, in that what is known nowadays as active transport, walking and cycling, and in some areas scooters and so on, people using active transport and micro-mobility. But obviously that's going to come to an end. I mean, once we get into the autumn and so on, weather starts to change, it gets dark, it gets a bit more difficult. I think there's a good opportunity then for the taxi and private hire industry to really benefit. But I think really the message coming from operators is there's a number of difficulties ahead, it's not going to be a smooth path back to whatever passes as normal. And of course, none of us know how long that's going to take and how long and painful that's going to be. I normally take a fairly optimistic stance on most things in life. None of us have been faced with anything like this before. I mean, we can't compare it to recessions or slowdowns or anything else. I mean, it's nothing of the sort. And none of us really know how this is going to play out. And I think that's why these discussions, such as this webinar this afternoon, are particularly useful, because even if none of us can identify all the answers, perhaps we can identify at least some of the questions, and provide an understanding what other people are doing, other people are thinking, and that way it will help both buyers of taxi and private hire services and also operators to chart the course going forwards. So I think, Paul, that at this juncture, because obviously I'm as keen as you are to get onto the discussions, I think that's where I'd like to leave it for the moment, if that's okay.
Sure, yeah, thanks, Mike. Yeah, there is actually quite a lot of questions that had come in before this session tonight, and there are quite a few on the Q&A as well. So let's try and, I think it'd be good to now open it up. And obviously Greg's an expert from being an operator and a current operator. Hopefully you guys can, I'll just start asking some of the questions. I think that's probably the best way to do it. Just give me one moment. Okay, so the first question on here that has been asked, I'd say this is probably to both of you. how do you guys think that the ground transport industry has sort of coped overall so far with COVID-19 of what's happened?
So it's a great question, and I think there's a number of phases to that. Initially, as Mike alluded to, we saw businesses scaling down, bolting down the hatches, making sure that they're in a position to ride out the period, and many people, not all, but many companies saw the demand go from what was looking like a very good year in January at the beginning of February to almost nothing by the middle of March. In our business, like everyone else, we started reforecasting as the scale of the crisis started to emerge. With a forecast for 90% of our volume, 80% of our volume, 70% of our volume, and speaking to a number of my colleagues and peers out there, everybody went through the same process. So I think that was done, and we've seen businesses ready to weather that storm. And then we moved very quickly into planning mode, because we all know at some point we've got to come out of this, and Mike's very clearly set out some of the challenges in terms of managing your cash flow as a business, and how do you make sure you have the working capital in place to pay drivers, and when lease holidays are over and everything else, all of these costs are coming back at some point. But I think the real thing is building confidence for travellers to actually get out there and go again. And without our customers, all of this planning will come to nothing. And on a recent webinar I joined, where there was business travel buyers from large global corporations talking to us, they were very clear. They have two types of traveller working for them. There are those that are absolutely dying to get out there and want to start travelling today. And they're the ones they're hearing from. The ones they're not hearing from are those that are hunkered down in their home offices, who have no intention of going anywhere for the next 6 months. And it's really those people we have to reach out to as an industry, and provide the reassurance that they need, that they can go out, start meeting their clients and their colleagues, commute to and from work, and do so safely. And I think that's where the bulk of the planning now has been. It's all been about how we keep our vehicles clean, how we make how we deal with the sanitization, how we deal with the communication, how we deal with things like vehicle capacities, communication to customers about what we need them to do in terms of wearing masks, etc., etc. And I think the more we do of that, not just we're talking specifically about the private hire industry, but everyone in the travel industry, from airlines to hotels to every sector of the travel world. That's the message we've got to get out there, is the economy needs you traveling, it needs you visiting your clients, it needs you selling and growing your businesses. And you can't do that from your study at home. We need to be out there, and I think that's the message we need to tell.
Thank you, Greg.
Yeah, unusually, Paul, I kind of agree with Greg. I think as an industry, we're pretty used to peaks, troughs, seasonality. We're either rushed off our feet or we're dead. We've kind of all got that in our veins and our makeup, really. Obviously, this is off the scale as far as the challenges that we've been faced with. And I think what I've found from operators that I've spoken to is, in the early days of this happening, there was it was pretty much the normal strategic change curve. There was kind of anger and denial. Oh, but, this can't carry on. There's no way this can happen. Then it's happened. Then suddenly you start to move into acceptance, and then people actually dealing with it really well. And I think what Greg's saying is, obviously different people took different lengths of time to adjust to what was happening. But I think that's exactly the situation, that most people now have adjusted. they've started to look at what can we do? You know, are there other sources of business, deliveries, NHS, whatever it is that we can pull in? What can we do with our vehicles? How do we deal with the drivers? And I think Greg is absolutely right. I mean, business is built on confidence. Everything is about confidence. And, you know, if we can present as an industry that confident air that, you know, we've got this sorted, we're a safe form of transport, we've put lots of measures and steps in place, I think then, you know, we've paved the ground to start to see things start to move. I mean, I think normal, forget it. We're going to have to adjust what we consider as being normal, but I think we're certainly on the road then.
Thank you, and thanks both. I just I suppose be mindful of. I've only asked one question so far, and we've, as much as I can talk about this for hours, we've got a few to go through. So let's try to all kind of go through it a bit more quickly if we can. I think this one's probably specifically for you, Mike. It's probably better. Have regulators and policymakers done enough and quickly enough?
Probably not, but probably they've done the best they could under the circumstances. I think that, you know, government, policymakers, local licensing authorities, regulators, I think they've all had a pretty difficult time. You know, they haven't had to face these situations the same as we haven't had to face them before. It's all new. Everybody's had to make it up as they go along. And, you know, probably the answer is no. Had they done a good job? Probably. You know, they've probably done the best job under a really difficult set of circumstances. And I think that, you know, some have been a bit more innovative and pragmatic about things than others. But nonetheless, overall, I don't think we could have expected a great deal more. I think that's where I'd leave that one.
Okay, thanks, Mike. I forgot, I'm actually going to go over now to kind of some of the actual questions that people have posted live, and hopefully we'll have time to go back to some of the ones that people asked before. So there is actually a first one on there, and this probably goes to both of you, that someone has asked, what does the Prime Minister's latest major announcement mean for the industry and travel, and how will this be impacted by localised lockdowns that come into place, e.g. Leicester?
You going first, Greg?
I think, I mean, in terms of various announcements that we've seen, we're really, I think, yeah, as a company that specialises more in international travel than domestic, I think we're looking very closely at what's happening with the quarantine situation. We're looking very closely at what's happening with opening up air routes. Slightly concerned that the focus has been very much on leisure travel and getting people on holiday, when really, you know, in my opinion, would be we need people traveling on business. We need people out there firing up the economy and doing all of that good stuff. Yeah, so I'd rather see air bridges to Germany and Holland than Spain and Greece, quite frankly. But any opening up of borders is a good thing. And you know, where people can travel safely, I think they should be allowed, and as soon as possible. I think, you know, there's a lot of information about, particularly at the major airports, what they're doing in terms of screening. You know, if you actually get on a plane, you've been screened at least half a dozen times. So the chances of you catching something on an aircraft are very, very slim, because anybody with anything is likely to get sort of caught up in the screening before they go. So I think from that point of view, and in terms of the lockdowns, they're going to be necessary. And I think, you know, I would hope that you know, the lockdowns are entered into for the right reasons. They're not kept for too long, and that they're effective. You know, you could have questions about whether, you know, locking down Leicester, for example, does that just move people who want a haircut or who want to drink, go to Market Harbour or Nottingham, and actually it make the situation worse rather than better? But, you know, as Mike said with the regulators, I think the government's doing what it can in a novel situation to try and deal with it. And I think as businesses, we have to work, you know, keep working hard, keep our ears to the ground, and making sure we do what we can to navigate our way through whatever hands we're dealt.
Sure, thank you. And it probably leads slightly onto another question that Mark Burser from Professional Driver magazine has asked, is how does kind of, particularly the UK, cope with like the inconsistent way that the regulations regarding screens, PPE, capacity in a vehicle, they're applied by every licensing authority that exists, and there's hundreds of them, and they're all inconsistent. Is it kind of time that that maybe national government actually put a one guideline in for the industry because it's such a big form of transport, or not, or were we expecting too much? Because it's difficult if you're a traveller, a consumer traveller or a business traveller. It's kind of difficult that I could get a train from London and have one set of rules in my cab, and I arrive in Manchester and it's completely different. It doesn't build that confidence that you were saying travellers need.
Well, I think we'd cope with it the same way as we always cope with it. I mean, we this is nothing new, really. It's just applied to a new situation. I mean, many of us have been talking about, trying to get national guidelines or national legislation for a long time, and clearly that's what we'd like to see. So there is consistency. So we don't have a situation where, in one part of the city, the rules are one thing, and another part of the city, it's something completely different. We're not going to get this very quickly, are we? So I think for the moment, we're going to have to just cope with what we've got. There's not much we can do about it. But I do agree with you, Paul. I think the impact on the customer, if they go to one town or city where the regulator has allowed or even encouraged in some places screens to be put in the vehicles, and it all feels very nice, a bit like going in the supermarket, you've got a screen between you and the driver, it all seems good. And then you come to another city and there's no such thing. It's a bit worrying, and I think anecdotally from operators, there's a lot of feedback that customers would prefer to see screens in vehicles. They'd like to be separated from the driver. So I think, Mark has raised an important point, but unfortunately, we're not going to solve that very quickly, I don't think. I mean, the Department for Transport has trod very carefully in relation to taxis and private hire, and spoken about should and we'd like to see and that type of thing, rather than must. It might have been better if there was a stronger message coming out.
Sure, thank you. Another question, which I think is very pertinent at the moment, with there are a number of RFPs going on in the UK and globally for ground transport, which obviously is a new way for procurement professionals, procurement officers in these companies to procure the service. It's different. It's not the same as how it was before. So kind of, I suppose, what are the challenges, would you say, facing kind of travel buyers, procurement teams, as the world is going to move from the crisis-y kind of part back to some kind of trading and businesses? Well, it's obviously not normal, but the new type of business. What do they have to balance up costs? They have to balance up safety, incumbent supply versus that might have been ingrained in the company for many years versus new supply. I suppose there's lots and lots of questions, and I suppose I'm asking, do they need help? Do they need support, some of these procurement officers from the industry? Can they kind of advise in some sort of advisory role? How does that look, do you think?
So I think for travel buyers, procurement, travel aid, TMCs, etc., who are regularly going into travel RFPs, having to deal with a specific issue is nothing that's new to them. More recently, a lot of the focus has been on the environmental, on green policy, on sustainability, and those issues have been built very neatly into RFPs, and businesses have become very adept at providing the right solutions to those problems. And we are an industry that's used to applying ingenuity to what we do and coming up with new ideas. So I think in an RFP process, buyers will come across multiple solutions to their challenge, and the challenge is going to be, how can I get my travellers from A to B safely? How can I convince my board that we can bring our business back to full steam ahead, have people out there travelling, meeting clients, doing all the good stuff without any issue. And that's really the role of us as suppliers, is to provide them with the information that they need. And again, one of the feedback I've had from buyers is, they don't want to see companies come to them with a great big marketing piece about how they're going to keep their cars clean. It really is much more about providing them with data and information that they can easily communicate out to their business to say, this is the methods of travel and the suppliers we've chosen. These are the reasons why. This is how they're going to keep safe. This is how their processes work. And now you should be confident to go out there. And we're seeing two very different views as well. There are companies that are that their policy now is, we've been sitting down for too long. We've got to get out there and go to work. There are others that are very much still saying, this is a voluntary thing. We're not going to force anybody to travel. It's entirely up to you. And in both cases, they need us to come up with the solutions that they need.
Great.
Yeah, I'd add that they're at some disadvantage at the moment because they're going to see very low volumes, and the volumes are going to continue low for some time. I mean, in the past, when I've been involved in tenders, it's tended to be a customer who's spending X amount now and is going to double it over the next 3 years or something. So they're in a good situation to ask operators and so on to sharpen their pencil. And what I'd kind of appeal to customers to do is to, be a little more generous in the short term, because if you really want safe travel and you want vehicles cleaned properly and maintained properly, the cleanliness maintained, then that's going to add a cost to the supply of that vehicle. So I think, for want of a better term, screwing down price, it may not be the right occasion to do that. Likewise, I'd appeal to operators to do what Greg is saying and take a responsible attitude. If we promise to clean a vehicle after every journey or something, or we're intending to put various products and stuff in the vehicles, then we should make sure that we do that. And I think customers and suppliers work great when there's a really good partnership where they can trust each other. And I think now is the time for that trust to be demonstrated on both sides. Really, it might sound a bit apple pie and motherhood, but I think we're in a serious situation, and just screwing down prices because nobody's got any business is not going to put you in a situation where you end up with a kind of service and the cleanliness and everything else that you actually need.
Well, thank you both. There's one question as well that's been posted on here, which is, it's I suppose it's very honest, and it'd be good to get an honest answer. If the future is less travel, which it very obviously is, less office working, which it obviously is, and sort of a year or two of risk, how can this industry maintain its position? How can it recover? Can it maintain its relevance? It also connects to a question that Tony Marsden has posted, which is kind of about bad debt. Obviously people, businesses and most ground transport businesses are not that large and really rely on very regular cash flow. How are they going to, is there bailouts? Is there, what do people see as happening?
So I think in terms of relevance and how we deal with the way the world will inevitably change over the next couple of years, I think Mike said it earlier. We are generally a very scalable industry. So most businesses now will have slimmed down. They will have eliminated elements of cost. They'll have had a few months to take a good, long, deep look at their business and make decisions about costs that they've been bearing in the past that they don't need to, about how they can streamline, how they can change processes. So I think we're gonna see sort of two categories of business as we come out of these. There's going to be those that either already have or will fail, and unfortunately there will be some. And there will be those who come out of this leaner, trimmer and slimmer and actually able to do a better job than they were coming into it. And it will be, very sadly for some people, survival of the fittest in some ways. But what you'll end up with from a buyer and a traveller's perspective is potentially an industry that is better organised, better able to meet their needs, more streamlined, better service. The focus on detail that sanitisation requires forces a lot of rigour throughout the rest of the business. So I do think there's going to be some good businesses out there. I do think that people are going to be very well served. I think the marketplace will change shape. The dynamics of the marketplace will be different. The particularly, as Mike said, as we go into winter and we see public transport running at, filling up and people looking for alternative ways to commute. And I think in terms of the home office scenario, we saw the CEO of Barclays making a rash statement 6 weeks ago saying that they've built the last big city headquarters that they're going to build, and they're going to rely much more on home working and people working regionally in branches and so on, rather than have people commute into the city centre. The reality is, though, when they start to see their competitors in the city bringing people into the office, taking clients out to lunch, doing all the things that we have to do as businesses, that's going to change. Home working, I think we've all discovered home working can be more effective than most people would have believed, but you still cannot replace face-to-face human interaction, particularly when you're trying to win business and you're trying to manage client relationships. You have to get out and you have to be there. And that's where we're going to come into it. That's where this industry provides the answer to that question.
Do you think, just to add on to that, I know you want to speak as well, Mike, do you think there's a possibility that parts of the industry could actually thrive post-COVID, kind of when we come out of whatever we've come out of?
Without a shadow of a doubt, yes. And I'll let Mike.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think that, in this industry, forget the scale for the moment, because, we are talking a different scale, but the principles are the same. We've had to cope with lots of ups and downs and changes in any of our working lives. So we are a very adaptable industry. And I think that, what you're selling yesterday, you probably don't sell today, and you definitely don't sell tomorrow. So I think what you've got to do is look at the new scenario that's coming up. And I think probably our competitor has changed to being public transport. And it's about the safety side of traveling in a less populated vehicle, normally a single occupancy vehicle. It's making sure that, there's a feeling of cleanliness, of health and hygiene, and that the vehicle is safe and available. And I think that, as Greg says, people have had to adjust. Any business generally has got 10% of costs that it can take out one way or another. This time round, people have had to take a lot more than 10% out. But they'll have to do it. This is not going to end quickly. And I think the other thing is that, small enemies will have to work together.
Add on to that, Mike. You said it's not going to end quickly. Can I ask that question that probably is on everyone's minds? Is tell us the actual date this is going to end.
I'm going to tell you that date right now. No, sorry. Things are being gradually unlocked. I think July the 4th, this weekend will be the start of, some form of social life for people. Clearly airlines and stations are the big thing for this industry. It's something like a third, 40% of people's business in many companies more so comes from airports and stations and that kind of thing. You then start to add on restaurants and hotels. You then start to add on, business meetings, people having a drink in the evening, all that kind of thing. So it will gradually evolve. I think that there's kind of not exactly evidence, but there's certainly indicators, I think, that people will travel less. So I don't think we're going to get back to the travel volumes that we needed. But in your presentation, Paul, you spoke about the London Underground. The London Underground takes 8 million passengers every single day. It's the population of Sweden every day. They're going to cut down to something like 15% of capacity. Okay, so let's say half the people never go into the office again. Another quarter take a bike or walk, or, you know, a mobility scooter if they're licensed, that kind of thing. That still leaves an awful lot of people that could use taxis and minicabs. And that's really our target. That's what we've got to target at. And I think that, you know, the taxi industry, barbers and cab drivers are the first people affected by any downturn, but they're normally the first people that benefit from any upturn as well. And I think that what we've got to do is make sure that we're in the right position and we're targeting the right customers to take advantage of these changes and this upturn as things are gradually loosened. But, you know, if you ask for a date, I mean, to get back to normal, I mean, cleverer people than me are talking about 2 to 3 years, you know, big hotel chains, big airlines and so on. That probably is it. But, you know, we can set our own playing field here. We can target the customers who have, you know, earn a bit more than the average, who don't want to risk going on public transport, who need to travel and not going to go on a bike or a scooter in the middle of winter. They're the people that we should be targeting. And I think, you know, like many things in business, a lot of it is in your own hands. I mean, I'll take Tony's point, bad debts or not. I mean, you know, what can we do? We do our best to collect the money as much as we can. We have to cope with, you know, reducing the number of people who work for us, unfortunately. You know, we may have to change our business model significantly. But I think if we do, the people who come out the other end, and I do agree with Greg, you know, feel a bit like the Chancellor, not everybody's going to survive this. I think there may be opportunities to merge businesses as well, you know, smaller but merged. So I think everybody's got to be a bit, you know, the modern term of agile. I think people need to be agile and stop thinking about what we can't do and think about what we really need to do.
Yeah, thank you. And that's probably a perfect way for us to segue into probably, I think, the end, because we've talked through quite a lot, and that's great. And I think it's been really interesting for me, even though, you know, I've been around this industry a long time. I'm still passionate and find it. I think there is a real future for it. I don't think it's just going to disappear.
No.
I think we've all kind of agreed that, and I don't think that's just optimistic thinking. I think we've been around enough to kind of been through recessions and various things that are in some way similar. And I think, you know, the demand will be there. It's who's left standing, which does relate to travel buyers as well. Should they put their eggs in one basket and just go with one provider, or should they use, you know, more of a platform approach? So they're sort of spreading their risk, and, you know, it creates a whole load of new ways of thinking of people buying and consuming the service, I think. So I'd like to thank you both. I think it's been great. You've been really, you know, you've used great words, humour, all that kind of stuff that we need on these kind of occasions sometimes. So thank you, all of you. Thank you, everyone that's attended, that's come on from wherever you've come on and asked questions as well. Really appreciated. We do these regularly, these webinars, so they're kind of generally once a week. There's various things going on a Monday, and there's one on a Thursday. Look on our LinkedIn page. I would probably follow us on there. Get Business Solution, or the Get page on LinkedIn. You'll see all the different ones we have coming up on different topics, but relate similar. So yeah, I'll leave it there. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy your Thursday night, and enjoy the pub if you get to go to one on the weekend.
Thanks very much, Paul.
Cheers. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.